Record. All right, welcome everyone to our monthly community education webinar series. My name is Dr. Joe, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the founder of Forward Wellness and the clinical nutritionist. But I'm not speaking today. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing my good friend and phenomenal clinician, Christine Archer. Christine is a board certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner with nearly 30 years of nursing experience, including over 2 decades in maternal and obstetric health. As the founder of BFM Integrative Wellness, she specializes in perinatal mental health, postpartum recovery, and helping women navigate anxiety, depression, and major life transitions. Christine also has a special passion for supporting athletes, drawing from her own experience as a former bodybuilder. She deeply understands the mental stamina, discipline, and emotional challenges that come with high performance lifestyles. She blends evidence based psychiatry with holistic wellness, offering medication management, cognitive behavioral therapy, and personalized strategies rooted in compassion, faith, and cultural sensitivity. Her collaborative solution focused approach empowers clients to heal, thrive, and find lasting balance, mind, body, and spirit. So I'm so happy to welcome Christine. Just as a little housekeeping, before we start, if you have questions during Christine's presentation, please either write them down or drop them in the chat, and she's going to save about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for Q&A, so she can address your questions specifically. But she wants to kind of go through her presentation first and then come to your questions later. The second thing is try to make sure you stay muted during the presentation so that she, can basically present uninterrupted. If I see that you're unmuted, I'll go ahead and mute you just as a courtesy. But if you become unmuted somehow, go ahead and put yourself back on mute until she gets done. And at the end, you can feel free to unmute and ask your questions. Okay. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Christine Archer.
Hi, thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me on this presentation. I'm very excited to be here. I know when you read my bio, you kind of oops on the nutrition part, and I guess I should really add that in because I do have a postmaster's degree in nutrition. Sometimes it's just a lot to kind of write down and actually include there, but I have to definitely remember to do that. So, while I am really happy to help women with a lot of life transitions, nutrition and well-being is definitely one of them because I do believe that food plays a major part in our role as women in terms of just dealing with life transitions, physical needs and psychological needs. So hence why I'm here presenting. So let me just go ahead and get into it. Yes, I would like you to hold your questions to the very end, but I know how we are. So if you have a question that's just like, oh my God, I cannot wait, especially if your brain works the way that mine does, just raise your hand and kind of let Joe know. And she's more than welcome to interrupt me so I can answer your question immediately. All right, so let's dive right in. So conquering your cravings. So it's behavioral approaches to winning the battle with food cravings and emotional eating. So let me, give me 1 second. Sorry. Sorry, my computer just kind of froze on me. All right, here we go. All right, sorry about that. So basically, in terms of understanding the battle, so if you've ever found yourself sitting in front of the TV, which I have many times, or even after a stressful day, dealing with things that may have happened at work or things dealing with your kids, relationships, things like that. Even when you're feeling down or depressed, or even on the other end, when you're anxious or just happy, food cravings and emotional thoughts kind of tie in together. So, for example, what happens is you may have a certain emotion, you may feel down, you may feel depressed, you may feel anxious, you may be sitting in front of the TV and automatically you start to think like, oh, let me grab some popcorn. Oh, let me grab some ice cream. So basically to say is that, our emotional our food cravings, excuse me, are really deeply rooted in our emotions. And I know some of us have actually had that happen before. I know that I've actually had that happen. For example, personally for me, sometimes if I am feeling down or feeling really low, I tend to aim for the ice cream. Currently, right now, my favorite is Talenti. So I'm looking forward to hearing what some of your favorites are as well. So what I'm going to basically do is guide you through some effective and pretty much evidence-based behavioral strategies so that you can kind of gain insight into those cravings, definitely build awareness about it, and then reclaim your control over your eating habits. I just want you to know that cravings are not just a mere fact of will control. A lot of people will say that, oh, if you have willpower, then you can kind of control them. But I'm going to show you the science that's behind that as well. So, what are food cravings exactly? So, food cravings are intense desires for specific foods. Oftentimes, they are the foods that are not necessarily the best for us. You know, they're high in sugar, hence my Talenti. They can be salty foods, fat-filled foods, processed foods. So again, a lot of the chocolate, the milk chocolate, a lot of the candy, again, ice cream, things that are like that. And a lot of times there are our emotions are kind of driven based on those food cravings. So it's not always a physical need, but again, it's a psychological need and emotional need. And one of the things that we can actually learn how to do is to understand where the cravings are coming from, and then things that we can do to actually disarm them. So emotional eating is definitely a mind-body connection. So emotional eating, excuse me, happens when we use food to soothe our emotions. So kind of like when I gave the example of sometimes if I'm feeling down, feeling depressed, feeling low, I tend to aim for the ice cream. And for me, it's very soothing. It's very comforting. It kind of takes my mind off whatever it is that's bothering me at that moment. Again, it's sadness, loneliness. It can be anxiety. It can even be boredom. Sometimes if I'm bored, I would just think that I need to eat or feel that I'm hungry. And that may not necessarily be so. It's just that I'm looking for something to do. So what I'm going to go into now is actually developing coping mechanisms in order to help you, like I said, differentiate from when you are actually hungry and when food cravings actually come in. So let's go into the psychological aspects behind emotional eating. So it's about learning what are your emotional triggers that actually push you towards food. So food becomes a way to distract, soothe, and then suppress your emotions, such as I kind of disclosed earlier, one aspect may be stress, right? So high cortisol levels can trigger cravings for high fat foods, high sugar foods. Loneliness or sadness. Food, as I was describing before, mimics a connection between just feeling satisfied and having feelings of comfort. Boredom, right? So eating provides stimulation or structure in the absence of meaningful engagement. So pretty much if you are not engaged in something meaningful, if you're not talking to someone, or if your mind is just off wandering, oftentimes it can kind of lead you to, hey, let me just go ahead and eat something. Again, on the other end, if you're having anxiety or feeling overwhelmed, chewing and eating can offer, some slight momentary stress, sense of control or relief. So those are some things that you can look at also. The other thing is our brain is kind of wired with a lot of different neurotransmitters. One of the ones that I'm going to focus on today is dopamine, which is our reward, feeling good, trying to kind of transmitter that's in our brain, right? So the reward pathways in the brain, comfort foods release dopamine. Again, it's the feel-good neurotransmitter, and it's creating a cycle of reward and reinforcement. So this is why eating or emotional eating honestly feels good and effective, even though it may be temporary. And when I say temporary, meaning like, I don't know if ever you guys have experienced, but I know that I've experienced that, in order when I picked up my ice cream or picked up something that's really high in fat or something that's pretty much usually delicious to me, I feel good in the moment, but then shortly after, I may feel guilty or feel a sense of shame because now I've eaten all of this stuff that I, inherently know that may not necessarily be the best for me, or even know that I wasn't even really hungry, but then I chose to eat it anyway. Um, so emotional eating can also come from childhood conditioning, right? A lot of times, our parents or our caregivers when we were younger, rewarded us with food. So, for example, you did something that was pleasing to your mom, your dad, or whoever your caregiver was. What they would say, oh, now we can go out and we can get ice cream. Oh, now we can go to the store and you can get the favorite candy that you want, right? Or sometimes, even when we're younger, it could be that we're experiencing overwhelm, or, you may say, your parent or caregiver may say, hey, the child is crying. Let me go ahead and give here's a cookie. I just want you to stop crying. So I don't know if you've ever been guilty of doing that to your own kids or you experienced that. But those are some conditionings that actually happen from childhood as well. So again, as I was saying earlier, having that understanding that there are a lot of things that are actually happening in our brain, again, focusing on that neurotransmitter, that dopamine, that feel-good neurotransmitter in your brain. So it goes to say that cravings are not just a matter of willpower. They're deeply influenced by your brain's chemistry and basically by conditioning. So having an understanding of what's happening in your brain and also what has happened way, way in the past, out of the way that you grew up again with your caregivers and how you were influenced by food, it's kind of hard to say that you would just need to have willpower in order to stop your cravings. So again, it's not just a matter of willpower. So let me go into the dopamine factor just a little bit more deeper because it really, really does play a crucial role. So when you are eating foods that are extremely, I'm just going to say delicious because that's what they are to me. They are delicious, right? So highly palatable foods, if you want to be technical about it. A lot of times it's food that you can think are that are high in sugar, high in salt, high in fat. Our brain then releases dopamine, right? So again, dopamine is that feel-good neurotransmitter that's in our brains. So it's basically telling us that this food is good. It gives us a sense of pleasure. It gives us a sense of reward. So over time, what happens is the brain begins to anticipate the reward by just even thinking about the food. So if you've ever had the experience of like, again, I didn't share this, but I am from New York City. So one of the things that I love, 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 love is pizza. I just love pizza. So whenever I think about pizza, honestly, I think about positive things. I think about, just a reward. I think about the anticipation of it. I think about the cheese. I think about, the crust. And as you can see, I'm smiling now. So it really just makes me feel good. So again, the brain begins to anticipate the reward just by thinking about the food, right? So even the sight or even the smell of the food can honestly spike the dopamine neurotransmitters that's in our brain as well. So this process then reinforces the behavior or is forming what we call a habit loop. So pretty much you have the cue, then you have the craving, and then you have the consumption, which is eating, and then you have the reward, right? So it actually goes into a cycle. So what we then go to is then called conditioned responses. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Pavlov's dog. It's rooted in psychology. So pretty much they train this dog. So every time that they will have a bell ring, the bell will actually trigger in that dog that they would automatically start to salivate. So it's kind of like that in that sense in our brain, right? So our brain links certain experiences with food. So for example, watching TV. So if you're watching TV or if you go to the movies, your brain automatically connects that to popcorn, um, buttery popcorn, especially if you're at the movie theater. So it's definitely a connection. So oftentimes, if we are feeling stressed, some of the things that our brain may connect with feeling stressed is eating chocolate, right? To kind of give us that soothing type of feeling. If you are driving through a drive-through fast food, then all of a sudden, you have the urge to stop and want to actually get the food or pick up your favorite thing at that fast food. So these conditions are associated and stored in the brain in specific parts, the amygdala and the hippocampus. I won't get into the whole science of it all. However, the amygdala and the hippocampus is also where we process emotions and memory. So that's how it's kind of tied in together. So the more you repeat the pattern, the more automatic it becomes. Cortisol and the stress response. Again, our brain is just wired to have us do so many different things when it comes to food and the connections and the cravings. So when you're under stress, the body releases cortisol, which can then increase your appetite and then heighten your cravings for calorie-dense food. So calorie-dense food are usually, like I said, our comfort foods. They're usually high in sugar, usually high in fat, usually high in, they're just pretty much processed, right? So those are the things that we kind of aim for when it comes to comfort foods. This then disrupts the insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation, causing us to contribute, which contributes more to hunger. So all of this really just connects. Again, what I'm trying to really have you understand is that, the food cravings is not necessarily a mere act of willpower. If anything, that's what I want you to take from this presentation. There are a lot of things that are happening in our brain with our hormones, with our neurotransmitters, and even with experiences and emotions that we have learned even as children that have followed us into our adult years. So again, when it comes to the brain, there are a lot of different parts of our brain that are interacting with how we respond to food. Again, we talked about the neurotransmitters in terms of dopamine. We talked about the amygdala and hippocampus that really focuses on emotion and memory. And then two other parts that I want to talk about when it comes to the brain is called the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. So the limbic system really controls our emotional brain. So it drives impulses, craving-related behavior. That's what it kind of controls. The prefrontal cortex is called our thinking brain. So it helps regulate our decisions and our impulse control. Having said that, in high emotions or dealing with extreme stress, the prefrontal cortex, which kind of controls, again, us making good decisions and our impulse control kind of goes offline, which means it makes it harder to kind of resist cravings. So unless you've trained your brain with behavioral tools, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, with things like CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, or delay techniques, then really what you're doing is you're trying to fight something that's happening in your brain that you really, really don't have a lot of control over unless you put certain practices into play. Again, what I'm going to keep saying throughout this presentation is not a mere act of willpower. So I'm going to go into some behavioral techniques or behavioral approaches that kind of work in order to help us really alleviate or decrease some of our cravings that we may have, or at least have an understanding of why we're having them and what we can do to actually mitigate why we are having these cravings and the things that we can do to help us decrease it again. One of the things that I mentioned again was CBT. That's shortened for cognitive behavioral therapy. And what that does, honestly, is help us to identify and challenge the unhelpful thoughts that then lead to our emotional eating. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm just going to abbreviate and say CBT, helps us to reframe our thought. Basically, we're challenging the thoughts that we're having to make better decisions. So for example, with my example of feeling down or feeling depressed and things of that nature, and I understand that I may not necessarily be hungry, but I'm going to aim for that Talenti ice cream because I know that it's going to make me feel good. So when we use CBT, what we're actually doing is saying, hey, what is the real reason that I'm aiming for this particular ice cream or this comfort food? What am I truly feeling here? What emotion am I either avoiding or I'm trying to numb by basically aiming for the Talenti? And that's what CBT honestly does. It helps you to kind of identify the underlying reasons for our craving. Another approach that really helps is dialectical behavior therapy, which is called DBT. And that one really focuses on emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and mindfulness. So it's basically excellent for handling cravings in high emotion moments. Again, when we're feeling extremely anxious, extremely overwhelmed, and when we're falling into kind of like a deeper depression, that is what that theory is really helpful for. The other one that I want to talk about is mindfulness-based strategies. And it's really using your mind to really mindfully think about the things that we're doing. So mindfully eating, basically examining our body, like what are we feeling in our body? What are some of the things that we can do in terms of breathing? You know, how can our breathing actually help us to really calm down some of the stressors that is happening in our bodies? To basically create a pause between the urge and the action. So that's what mindfulness-based strategies pretty much does, is really having a kind of a thought of, okay, what is happening, and really thinking about the things that we are doing so that we can create a gap between the urge and the actual action. And then the final thing that kind of really works, I feel, is habit rewiring techniques. And it's basically using behavior to kind of trigger, is behavior training pretty much, that triggers and focuses on your triggers and your rewards, and basically re-engineering and implementing intentions to build healthier routines. So it's kind of like, you know, when you get up in the morning, you go to the bathroom, one of the first things we tend to do is go to the bathroom. Then after that, we brush our teeth, then we wash our face. So it's kind of like a chain of habits that we tend to do. And that is what kind of like what that does when you talk about habit rewiring techniques. So it's using our behavior to really retrain our triggers and our rewards so that we can make better decisions. One of the things that I want to focus on is how to identify our personal patterns. So one of the things that we can do is actually keep a craving log. So for example, for me, over time, I have come to realize that ice cream is definitely a vice for me, right? So I didn't even need to create a log for that. I just kind of knew that's what happens. So each time you feel an urge to eat, you can kind of jot down, you know, what exactly are you feeling? What exactly are you craving? So where you are and who you are with, because sometimes just being with certain friends or being in certain environments, it may trigger us to eat certain things, drink certain things that we might not necessarily do, but because we're in that environment or we're with this particular group, we tend to do that. What time of day is it? Do you find that your cravings are really late during the night? Are they early in the morning, in the mid-afternoon? And what's happening right before the craving starts? So that's the way to kind of help identify some of the personal patterns that you may have. And what this does is it builds self-awareness and basically highlights the emotional triggers. A second thing that you can do, which I tend to use a lot and often recommend, is the HALT method. So HALT, the HALT method. And you can ask yourself and go through that before eating. So it means asking yourself 4 different questions. So 1, am I hungry? So H is, am I hungry? Am I angry? Right? So the A stands for angry. So am I angry? The third, the L stands for lonely. So am I lonely? And then T stands for tired. Am I tired? Generally, when you have food cravings, it's falling under one of these 4 things. Generally, it's either asking yourself, are you really hungry? And really trying to identify that. You know, am I angry? So, you know, in emotion. You know, am I lonely? Again, that may come from boredom. And then asking yourself, am I tired? So this too kind of helps distinguish between physical hunger and an actual emotional need to eat. Another way to identify your personal pattern is to rate your hunger from 1 to 10. So before reaching for food, basically checking in with your body. So one of the ways to identify true hunger and emotional craving is physical hunger usually starts at the stomach and builds gradually. So between a 4 to 5 range, right? So sometimes if you're hungry, you may have your stomach may be growling. That's one sign that you can kind of note. So that's a way to identify a physical hunger. Emotional hungers, or let me say emotional cravings, often spike all of a sudden, and they're very specific. So for example, it may be, in my example, I'm feeling a little bit depressed, I'm feeling a little bit low, I'm feeling that emotion. So all of a sudden I have a spike and there's a need for me to have ice cream. So it's very, very specific. So that's the way you can kind of identify a physical craving or physical hunger, I should say, as compared to emotional cravings. Again, physical hunger happens gradually over time. It builds gradually over your body. You can check in with your body. Emotional cravings, again, they spike suddenly, and it's usually for something very, very specific. And then the last thing, which I often recommend, which I love and I recommend with everyone that I work with, is journal prompts, right? So you can try questions like, what emotion am I trying to avoid? What do I really need to be doing right now? And what would comfort me that does not involve food? So let me say, not but practical tools to rewire your relationship with food, right? Again, you can go over the craving log template. So these are practical things that you can do that you can kind of implement. So just highlighting it, just as I kind of went over before. Again, a craving log template, hunger versus a craving checklist. You can also come up with an emotional vocabulary list that honestly helps people as well. And then again, one of my favorites is the HALT techniques, because you actually have to stop. That's why it's called HALT. You actually have to stop and ask yourself, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? You can also replace emotional eating with self-care rituals that meet your real needs, right? So an emotional craving, and when you're aiming for foods that are high in sugar, high in fat, that are processed, you're really honestly trying to cover up or numb or avoid a particular emotion. So what are some things that you can do to meet your real need? Some of the things could be movement, which is in terms of maybe I need to go outside and take a walk. Maybe I need to exercise. Connection. Am I craving connection with somebody? Do I need to be talking to somebody? Resting. Oftentimes, if we are not getting adequate rest, we may find ourselves, reaching for things to kind of help along with that in terms of just really trying to either stay awake or avoid going to sleep. So we've aimed for something that's like food. A lot of times you get a lot of food cravings at night. So that would be one of the things that you could do, is getting adequate rest. And then creativity. Is it that you're just bored? Is it that you need to be involved in something creative so that you're not necessarily thinking about food? And then finally, is building or choosing meals that satisfy both your body and your mind using a balanced plate method. And I'm sure if all of you guys are here with Dr. Joe, I'm sure she's definitely talked about the balanced plate. So I won't necessarily go into that, but basically it means choosing healthier foods that's actually going to feed your body and actually feed your emotions and your mental well-being. So what I want to leave you with is a personalized action plan. If ever you find the time, and I highly recommend that you do create a personalized action plan for yourself, and really taking some time to mindfully think about the times when you're eating or having certain cravings. What exactly is going on at that moment? So then you can identify your top 3 emotional eating triggers. Again, one of the things that I've identified for myself is that, again, when I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling low or sadness, honest times when I'm feeling highly stressed or overwhelmed, those are some of the triggers for me that causes me to aim for food that not necessarily is feeding me physically in a healthy way, but it's mostly just really trying to have me numb the emotion that I'm trying to mask at that particular point in time. List your preferred coping strategies, right? So some of the coping strategies that I have come up with is the HALT method, right? Asking myself, am I really hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? What exactly is going on with me? And I personally like to say, okay, let me take this time and let me go out for a walk. Do I need to be out in the sun? Do I need to be talking to a friend? Some of the things that I have chosen for me that kind of work as strategies. You can also create a SMART goal. And a SMART goal is basically saying that, you're going to create a goal in terms of what are you going to do to manage that craving. Something that's very specific when it comes to a goal, something that you can actually measure, something that you can take an action plan on, and then something that you can actually work through to make sure that you have something in place to really reach or understand why you're having those particular cravings. And then finally, the other thing that you can do is do a 7-day behavior experiment, right? Over the next 7 days, kind of monitor what is it that you're eating. How have your emotions have been? And when your emotions have been a particular way, did you aim for something that you don't typically aim for? Do you have a particular food that generally just makes you happy? Not necessarily that it has a physical need, but it literally makes you happy. So one of the things that I definitely want to leave you with and the final thoughts that I have, and then we can kind of dive into questions. Again, as I was saying through this presentation, this does not have to do with just you having willpower. One of the things that I find, and honestly, I used to believe myself, like, I'm just not strong enough. I just don't have enough willpower. I'm just very weak-minded. I should be able to control this. And it's not until that I really started digging into and, obviously doing some studying and realizing that the brain plays a big, big role in that. And it's not just about willpower. There are a lot of things that are coming into play that now that I have a little bit more understanding, I can actually have some grace for myself and understand that it's not just merely a fact of willpower, right? So what I want you to know is that you are definitely not alone. Even the practitioners that work with you, these are things that we have experienced. These are things that we are constantly working through. So it's not oh, I'm going to fix this and it's going to be said and done. No, because we have all different types of things going in our life any given point in time. However, if we do have an understanding of what's kind of happening, then we are definitely armed and better equipped to deal with the cravings that we may have. So recovery isn't about perfection. It never is. It definitely is about progression. So again, we can offer ourselves some grace and we can offer ourselves some mercy that when we choose to aim for something that's not necessarily the best for us physically or actually mentally, but we can kind of start to point out, okay, what need was I trying to meet when this happened, as opposed to going into guilt or shame or the negative connotations that we tend to attribute to ourselves, right? I want you to understand that you're not broken, all right? We are all learning, we are all healing, and we are all moving forward. So I want you to have compassion for yourself, not criticism. And again, compassion is definitely your greatest ally. So I want you to know that you got this. You definitely don't have to do it alone, especially if you're working with Dr. Joe, or if at any point in time you choose to work with me as well. So we can really get into the mechanics of our brain and how that's actually working. And we can honestly conquer those cravings together. All right, so that is my presentation for you guys today. Hopefully you've gotten some good tidbits and you've learned something and kind of can move forward with that. But I am definitely looking forward to some of the questions that you have. So I guess we can open it up now.
Wow, that was so good, Christine. Thanks so much. I learned a lot, and I have learned a lot in my education on this, because we have to know about it. But I learned a lot more than what I was taught from that, psychological lens. So I really appreciate your take on that. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and then I will get to those. I did want to let everybody know that I did put some resources in the chat for you guys. There is a link to a book on mindful eating that Christine referenced mindful eating, so I put a link to a book that I often recommend to my patients in there. It's called Mindful Eating. I put a link to the HALT method from the American Addiction Centers. If you want to refer back to that, please do. Christine talked about different types of hunger, so I put a link to that. She talked about journaling, and so I put a link to Zenit Journals, which is a fantastic wellness-based journal. Every day there's a prompt about wellness specifically, and so if you're on a wellness journey, I think those would be really good. By the way, these are not things that I have any connection to in any way. They're just resources that have been beneficial to either me or my patients or both. I also put a link to Christine's account where you can schedule an appointment if you live in Maryland. That's where she's licensed. Feel free to reach out to her to help you conquer your cravings. Okay, so now the questions. Brooke asks, is there any advice on food noise? As I'm eating, I'm always thinking of what my next meal will be. I'm able to wait till I'm hungry 90% of the time. It's just a constant thought.
Yeah, so I actually talk a lot about food noise, and I'm sorry I actually didn't even mention that. But yes, so there are some things that you can do with food noise. Food noise typically happens to every single person. Honestly, it happens with me as well. Whereas I get what you're saying, you're kind of eating and then you are thinking about your next meal. I honestly had a lot of food noise when I was bodybuilding. Right. So I was on a very restrictive diet. And oftentimes I would be eating one meal and literally I'm thinking in 3 hours, what is that next meal going to be? Some of the things that you can do to actually help alleviate some of that food noise is really trying to figure out, again, is there an emotional involvement in that? Is there a physical need for that? For me specifically, when I was experiencing a lot of food noise, again, it was because I was on a very restrictive diet. Oftentimes when you are bodybuilding, you are eating very, very clean. You know, I'm not eating the sugar, I'm not eating the processed food, I'm not eating anything like that. So again, I would honestly want to know when my next meal is coming. And one of the ways, again, that I did avoid that is really understanding that one, there was a reason why I was doing what I wanted to do is because I wanted to bodybuild. I wanted to build a healthier body. I wanted to perform on stage. And then I also realized that I would be coming up to my next meal, but then I would have healthier foods that would actually help me carry through. So I don't know personally necessarily that you will 100% get rid of food noise because it happens for, again, it could be for physical reasons, it could be for emotional reasons. So I would definitely advise you to kind of dig deeper into why during that 10% that you're experiencing that kind of food noise. And what is it that you're actually craving for during that food noise, right? So a lot of times when I had food noise, it would be craving for things that honestly would make me feel good, which would be again, the high fat, the high sugar, those types of food. But again, those foods were restricted for me at that particular point in time. So I would invite you to kind of dig deeper into that a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a great response. Oftentimes that food noise is a sign that we're missing something. It could be emotional, but it could also be like, nutrient wise. Like if, let's say your breakfast was like oatmeal and you had no fats or no protein, like the food noise could be there because your body's like, hey, we didn't get enough of this. So yeah, I think that's really great advice, Chris. Okay, Shannon asks, as an ADHD coach, rewards are commonly implemented when weekly goals are accomplished. Sometimes people want to use sweets. Any tips or recommendations for navigating this conversation or alternatives?
So the question is, people want to aim for sweets. I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit.
Okay, so it looks like Shannon is an ADHD coach.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, as an ADHD coach, rewards are commonly implemented when weekly goals are accomplished. Sometimes people want to use sweets. Any tips or recommendations for navigating this conversation or alternatives? Oh, she has another note. At the moment, I like the 7-day behavioral monitoring, but clients have unmanaged ADHD, might not be able to stick to 7 days. So she's wondering, are there any tips or recommendations for navigating the conversation about using sweets as a reward when their weekly goals are accomplished for when she works with her ADHD clients?
Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption that the sweets are not healthy sweets, because that's the one question I would want to ask. So sweets meaning that the sweets are unhealthy, because one of the ways that you can navigate that, I mean, you can definitely have sweets, but it just depends on what sweets you're actually having, right? So there are different ways to meet our I guess our sweet cravings. So you can either do that with high sugar foods in terms of like, the Talenti for me, milk chocolate, candy. So that's one way you can say that is a sweet. Or you can meet it through eating things that are naturally sweet. So for example, eating fruits, things like that, that would be a little bit healthier for you. So I'm guessing the sweets are unhealthy as opposed to healthy. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Yeah. So then what I would say is really try to change the conversation in terms of choosing healthier sweets, as opposed to the unprocessed sweets. For example, people may like chocolate, as opposed to having milk chocolate. Maybe I would aim for dark chocolate, because honestly, a lot of times that will meet the craving for sweets, but then it's not as unhealthy as eating pure milk chocolate. A lot of times, if you have, especially now in the summertime, if you are eating and the fruits are in season, you can find strawberries, watermelon, you can find mango, you can find all of these different types of sweets that are actually healthier for you. And your body actually knows what to do with that type of natural sweet, as opposed to eating foods that are just like, again, the ice cream, the highly processed foods in which our body does not know what it needs to do with it. And then it forms an addictive process. So I would say kind of working through that and offering different suggestions as opposed to the unprocessed stuff.
Okay. There's one other question from Shannon. And the question, I had to look it up, child, because Shannon, you're using big words up in this chat. So it says, I also wonder if you have any insights for rating or assessing hunger for people with alexithymia. So I looked it up. It says alexithymia is a personality trait characterized by difficulties in experiencing, identifying, and expressing emotions. I know the mental health people probably already knew, but I had no idea. Okay, so she wonders if you have any insights for rating or assessing hunger for people who have difficulties expressing, identifying, and experiencing, identifying, and expressing emotions. Um, the slow build of hunger versus immediate hunger helps a bit.
Yeah, so that's actually what I was going to say is just that, is really trying to identify the physical cues, if that person is not really able to identify emotional cues. So the physical cues, again, it really happens gradually over time. So for example, if you wake up in the morning and you don't have breakfast, right? You may be okay for a little bit, but maybe a couple of hours later, you may have a headache. That's a physical cue. You may find that you a little bit dehydrated in terms of like you're not going to the bathroom as much. That's a physical cue. You may also find that your stomach is growling. That's a physical cue. So honestly, really being able to identify the physical cues, in my opinion, is a little bit easier than identifying the emotional cues, because you feel it in your body, right? You honestly feel it in your body. And those are things that's actually going to help you. So those are some of the things that I would honestly work on or help that person identify, is what are the physical cues, meaning how do you feel it in your body? Is it headaches? Is it a little bit of confusion? Some people might say irritability, and maybe that's an emotional slash physical cue, but I would honestly look at that as well. Is your stomach growling? For me, if I don't eat over a certain period of time, I honestly start to get bloated, because I start to feel like I'm building up with gas. Maybe TMI, but that's what happens with me. So then that's a physical cue for me as well. So really helping that person to kind of identify those types of things. Some people, it just depends. So that's really a work in progress. But I mean, that would be something that I would really be interested in, really doing an experiment like that 7-day challenge, that I would work on that and start from there.
Okay.
Hopefully that answered your question.
I think so. Yeah, because she posted a follow up. Okay, Ted says I have a few questions.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Christine.
Hey, Ted.
Hey. Okay. You talk a lot about food cravings. Okay. Having been on Earth for a while. Okay. Back in the day, is th- they used to call is that what they used to call body craving? Your body is craving certain type of food.
And that's a conversation that we still have today, right? And it
Hmm.
goes along the line of what Joe was also saying as well. Sometimes our bodies may be craving a particular thing, and it
Right.
may be it may be because we're deficient in some kind of nutrient, some kind of something. And so we call that body cravings, meaning like you're literally going through different types of food in order to fulfill this particular type of need. Now, have I
Right.
suffered from that? Yes, I have. And but the difference between that, I honestly feel, is like you're really trying to figure it out. You may aim for the bad stuff, the unprocessed stuff, and
Hmm.
then you may also aim for the healthy, good stuff as well.
Hmm.
Sometimes, say if we're feeling tired, we're feeling a particular way, and we may aim for something that's not necessarily the best for us, but then you may decide, you know what, I'm going to have a piece of steak. Then all of a sudden that craving or that body craving is gone, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you would want to know, what exactly was my body missing? And now that goes into it a little bit deeper, which is more along the side. Again, I'm a nurse, so along the lines of, okay, I would want to know, hey, let's check your labs, let's see if you're missing anything. Are you anemic? What exactly is your body saying that it needs, that you may be deficient in? What kind of vitamins you may be deficient in? So I
Hmm.
mean, I do thank you for that question, because it goes into it a little bit deeper, and it's not necessarily just a craving, but your body is actually missing something.
Okay.
Hmm.
My next question is, okay, and I still got a couple more. Um,
Okay.
you talk about emotional eating. Okay. Now, being old school, okay, what's the difference in emotional eating and just flat overeating? Okay. Because I think some people might fall back on emotional eating or having, having a crutch for emotion. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And because I see people nowadays, they eating all over the place. They're eating in the car, they're eating in the bedroom, they eating in the living room, they eating while they're on the phone, they eat while they're watching TV, things like that. And how can we, I know how I combat that, but how can we, everybody, combat that? Because there's food everywhere. You drive down the street, on every corner, there's three restaurants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how can they keep from using, okay, I'm feeling this way, so I'm gonna go get McDonald's. I'm feeling this way, so I'm going to get Wendy's. I'm feeling this, you know what I mean? Is that a
Yeah.
crutch or is it true emotional eating?
So, I mean, it depends. It can definitely be true emotional eating. What I would, want to do or have that person do is usually is pretty much implement some of the techniques that I had mentioned. One of them
Mm-hmm.
specifically is a HALT method, because it's so very simple. And then you
Mm-hmm.
can ask yourself those 4 questions, right? So, in order for you to implement the HALT method, I think also you would have to have some mindfulness training in that too, right? Being mindful
Okay.
of the things that you're actually doing. So once you're mindful of the fact that, hey, every time I'm walking down the street, I stop for this particular food, or every time I'm talking to my friend, I'm again, depending on who you're talking with, the conversation, I want to eat. Every time I sit in front of the TV, I want to eat. And also being mindful, just as you said, yes, food is everywhere, right? So
Mm-hmm.
having that mindfulness to actually notice that these things are happening, then I would say implement some of the practical tips. Again, I would say the HALT technique, because you can use it anywhere. One, the things that you need to ask yourself: am I hungry? Right? Am I really
Right.
hungry? So am I really experiencing physical cues? You might not
Mm-hmm.
be. right? Am I
Right, right,
angry? You know, and then the anger, it says angry, but you can use any kind of emotion with that, right? So am I really angry? Am I feeling depressed? Am I stressed? Am I overwhelmed? The L is for lonely. Is it just that, you know, I'm missing my friends? You know, I'm missing family. There's no one for me to talk to. I don't really have that much of a social outlet. So then now I'm resorting to food, right? Because again, the food then releases dopamine, which then makes me feel good, right? So that's one of the things you might want to look at. And then secondly, am I tired? You know, am I tired? Am I just, you know, bored? Am I just tired? Do I just need to rest? Do I just need to sleep? Do I just need to recharge, you know, my body? Because oftentimes we do not give sleep enough thought. You know, a lot of us tend to operate with, you know, maybe sometimes I had, you know, a client earlier that said, you know, she's sleeping 2 hours a night. That is not enough for anybody, right?
right.
When you sleep, that's when your body recharges, right? That's what I like to say. That's when it recharges. Again, if you are lacking sleep, a lot of areas in your body in terms of like hormones, your neurotransmitters, just the way that your body function are all distorted. So are you tired or you probably just need some rest? So that's why I really love recommending the HALT method because you can use it at any point in time. And it's very simple.
Okay. And I like that point that you touched on. Back in the day, they always use food as a reward. I'll give you this candy. I'll give you this if you be good. Things like that.
Yeah,
They use
yeah.
that stuff as a reward.
Yeah, and honestly, you know, it's one of those things that I have to be mindful also. And so it's not even just back in the day, it happens now, right? Parents are often doing it. Even me
Right.
who have an understanding of this, and I had to really understand and really implement some of the things that I'm actually teaching. So I don't just teach it, I also drink the Kool-Aid, right? So
Hmm.
even with my daughter is a foodie. She actually wants to be a chef when she grows up. And the girl loves food. She loves food. I do too. She loves food. And oftentimes, if she, you know, would do well in school, if she got a certain amount of A's, or if she did certain things, what she would ask for is food. So I necessarily would not be the one offering it to her, but what she wanted was food. Like, you know, hey mom, and she loves wings, loves wings. She always want wings, always, always, always. So
Hmm.
it took me a moment to realize that, you know, and to me initially, I was like, you know, oh yes, you know, this is kind of like let me go ahead and get her that until I realized, good Lord, this is a pattern. You know, this child's eating
Right.
wings so very often. And then I had to start implementing different things like, you know, hey, we're not going to do wings this time. You know, do you want to get some nail polish? Do you want to get your nails done? Do you
Right.
want, you know, a gift card to Amazon? I had to come up with different ways. Do you want to go to the movies? I had to come up with different things that did not necessarily equate to food. Um,
Right.
so again, it's just being mindful. So it may not always be the parents, but sometimes you may just have a child that really just loves to eat and it
Hmm.
makes them happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was it. I had a whole page of notes, but that was it.
Thank you for your
Thank,
questions. Those were
thank
good.
you.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Is there anyone else that had any questions that you'd like to ask Christine? You can feel free to unmute. I don't want to make sure that we have about 7 more minutes before we have to go. So I want to make sure that I get everyone an opportunity to ask their questions if they have any. Okay. Seeing no more, I do want to again thank Christine Archer so much for this wonderful presentation, a very informative presentation. We will follow up with you guys and send you an email to the video if you feel like it's beneficial to watch again for yourself or to share with someone else that you know. I'll also be sending you some information. There's a little pamphlet that I have called Crush Your Cravings, and it has some similar ideas that Christine mentioned today, you know, just with helping to manage food cravings and things of that nature. I'll also send you the information for our next webinar, which will be on August 19th. And the topic will be back to school wellness, healthy habits for the entire family. So basically have how to navigate into a new school year if you got kiddos, or if you yourself are going back to school or something like that. Just kind of bringing the whole family into it and making sure that you start the school year off on a healthy track. So I'll send you the information for registering for that one. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. You guys had really excellent questions. Like I said, I just want you guys to go away knowing that it's not just merely about willpower at all. And hopefully I've come across to let you guys know that it's much deeper than that. So have some mercy, have some grace, and have some compassion for yourself, okay?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, guys.